Hannah Clark had always felt like she lived under a bright spotlight, even when she was alone. Growing up in the small town of Willow Creek, everyone knew her as the preacher's daughter, the girl who was expected to smile politely, dress neatly, and never step out of line. People admired her, but their admiration felt more like pressure than kindness. She didn't feel seen. She felt observed. From the moment she was old enough to walk, she had been taught to move carefully. Her father, Pastor Jonathan Clark, was respected by almost everyone in town. He was a thoughtful man, calm in his speech, and serious in his beliefs. He loved his daughter deeply, but he also carried a firm idea of who she should be. He imagined her as a model of discipline and faith, someone who would represent the family name with pride. So he tried to guide her, as best as he could sometimes, a little too closely. People in Willow Creek had a way of building opinions quickly and holding onto them tightly. At school, teachers expected Hannah to be the calmest student in class. At the grocery store, strangers complimented her posture or her polite tone. At church, older women pulled her aside to whisper advice about becoming a proper young lady. Every smile she received felt like a reminder that she could not disappoint anyone. What no one knew was that the expectations she carried were heavier than they appeared. Hannah hid her real thoughts, the way some people hide secrets in old boxes quietly and without letting anyone notice. She felt like she had two versions of herself, the one she showed the world, and the one she kept locked inside. The one she showed the world was patient, soft-spoken, and always agreeable. The one inside her was loud, curious, and restless. Her restlessness didn't come from wanting to break rules or cause trouble. It came from wanting to understand who she really was, without the town's eyes following her every step. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she wasn't sure if she recognized the girl staring back. Was she the person she had chosen to be? Or the person everyone else had built for her? Willow Creek wasn't a big town. The roads were quiet. The houses were spaced far apart, and the same pickup trucks drove the same routes every day. If someone dropped a spoon in one house, someone across town probably heard about it before lunch. That was the kind of place it was. People called it charming, but Hannah often thought predictable was a better word. Her days followed a fixed routine. Wake up early, help with breakfast, attend school, return home, practice piano for church, join her father for evening prayers, finish homework, sleep, repeat. There was no moment that wasn't planned, no hour that wasn't expected of her. Despite the structure, her father wasn't unkind. He believed discipline made life easier, safer, and more meaningful. But sometimes, when he wasn't looking, Hannah wondered what it would feel like to live a day without rules, a day where she could breathe without worrying about disappointing someone, a day where she didn't have to be perfect. The hardest part was pretending she didn't mind. When people complimented her, she smiled. When they asked for help, she agreed. When someone made a mistake, they apologized to her as if she were some kind of standard of goodness. She felt trapped inside a character she never agreed to play. There were small moments when her true self tried to break through. When she climbed the hill behind her house and felt the wind rushing through her hair. When she ran so fast across the field that her lungs burned. When she sat alone by the river and let the water drown out the constant noise of expectations. In those moments, she felt alive, free, human. But as soon as she stepped back into town, the feeling faded, replaced by the familiar weight of being watched. Her father often preached about living truthfully, but Hannah didn't know how to live her truth yet. Whenever she tried to open up, she felt the words freeze inside her. She feared that if she let someone see the real her, they would think she was disappointing, ungrateful, or simply wrong. So she kept quiet. She told herself that silence was safer. School wasn't much easier. Even her classmates saw her through a filter of expectation. Some admired her, Some envied her. Some thought she had the easiest life in the world. Very few understood her. She wished someone would look past the polished exterior and see the questions she carried. Sometimes, in class, she would drift off into daydreams about traveling to cities where no one knew her. Places where she could walk without being recognized. She imagined getting lost on purpose just to see who she could become without eyes following her. But daydreams faded quickly, replaced by the teacher calling her name or the bell ringing for the next lesson. Her mother had been gentle and warm, always reminding Hannah that the heart needed room to grow. But her mother had passed away when Hannah was 12, leaving a quiet ache that never fully healed. Her father tried to fill the space her mother left behind, but some spaces simply couldn't be filled. They could only be carried. Every Sunday, Hannah stood next to her father as he greeted the congregation. People smiled at her as if expecting her to glow with perfection. She smiled back because she didn't know what else to do. But inside, she felt a small tug, a feeling that she didn't belong in the perfect image people painted of her. She wanted to be good. She wanted to make her father proud. But she also wanted something else. Something she couldn't quite describe. Space. Breath. A sense of self that wasn't shaped by everyone else. She wasn't rebellious. She wasn't wild. She wasn't angry. She was simply lost in a role she didn't choose. But everything began to change the day Jace Moreno arrived in Willow Creek. He wasn't loud or showy. He wasn't bothered by the town's gossip or the constant staring eyes. He worked with quiet strength, fixing fences, lifting heavy supplies, and helping with repairs around town. People liked him, but not in the same way they admired Hannah. They liked him because he was genuine. No filter. No mask. No performance. The first time Hannah saw him was from her bedroom window. He stood near the old church fence, examining the broken boards, with patient focus. There was something different about him, something that caught her attention without warning. It wasn't about attraction or charm, it was about freedom. Jace looked like someone who lived by his own rhythm, not by the expectations of others. He moved with the ease of someone who didn't worry about being judged. His simple confidence unsettled her. Not because she disliked it, but because she longed for it. She didn't know it yet, but meeting him would force her to confront the truth she had been hiding for years, that she was tired of pretending. That she wanted to understand who she really was beneath all the expectations, and that she wasn't as perfect as everyone believed. And for the first time in her life, that thought didn't scare her. It made her feel alive. Jace Moreno arrived in Willow Creek on a quiet morning, when the air was cool and the sky was painted with soft peach colors. He wasn't the kind of person who drew attention, yet people noticed him anyway because he carried himself with calm confidence. He didn't try to impress anyone. He didn't try to hide anything either. He simply existed as he was, and that alone made him stand out in a town where almost everyone lived by the rules of others. Jace's life had never been easy, but he didn't complain. He worked where work was needed, sometimes on ranches, sometimes repairing buildings, sometimes helping out at farms that couldn't afford extra hands. He believed in earning his sleep, earning his food, and earning his place. That belief gave him a quiet strength that didn't need to be shown off. When he arrived in Willow Creek, he was hired to repair the old fence surrounding the church. The boards had warped under the hot sun over the years, and some had started to break. The job wasn't complicated, but it required steady hands and patience, two things Jace had plenty of. Hannah first saw him from her bedroom window. She hadn't expected anyone to be working that early. But there he was, bending down, studying the boards, with thoughtful attention. His hat kept the sun out of his eyes, and he moved with calm focus, as if he had all the time in the world. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't distracted. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just present. And that simple quality, being fully present, was something Hannah had rarely seen in people her own age. She found herself watching him longer than she meant to. not because she found him charming in the traditional sense, but because he seemed so different from the people around her. He didn't look like someone who cared about the town's gossip or the expectations others placed on him. He didn't seem like he was performing for the world. He was simply himself. Later that morning, Hannah made her way to the church to bring her father some papers he had forgotten. She tried not to look in Jace's direction, but curiosity tugged at her. When she finally let her eyes wander toward him, he looked up at the same moment. Their eyes met for only a second, but the moment felt longer than it was. Jace didn't stare at her the way some people did, examining her, judging her, expecting something from her. His gaze was steady, calm, polite. He nodded as a greeting, then returned to his work. It was such a simple exchange, but Hannah felt a small warmth in her chest. She wasn't used to being looked at without expectations. Pastor Jonathan Clark approached Jace with his usual serious expression. "You're starting early," the pastor said. "Helps me finish on time," Jace replied gently, lifting a board to check its weight. "And heat gets rough later." Hannah listened from nearby, pretending to sort papers on a small bench, even though she wasn't paying much attention to them. "Good," her father said. "This fence has needed care for months. Folks kept tripping near the corner. I appreciate you helping out." "No trouble," Jace said with a faint smile. "Work is work." Hannah noticed that he spoke with a quiet tone, respectful but not fearful. Many people in town became overly polite around her father, trying to impress him or avoid his disapproval. Jace didn't do either. He treated Pastor Clark like any other person, not with disrespect, but with simple honesty. After her father left to prepare for the day's tasks, Hannah walked toward the church door. She wasn't planning to talk to Jace. She wasn't even sure she could. She rarely spoke to people outside her usual circle, and whenever she tried, she worried about saying the wrong thing. But as she passed by, Jace nodded again, acknowledging her politely. "Morning, ma'am," he said. No one her age called her ma'am. It startled her a little. "Oh, good morning," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. She didn't expect him to say more, but he added, "Your father said you help run the youth programs." She blinked in surprise. "Yes, I help when needed." "That's good work," he said simply. "Takes patience." Hannah almost laughed at that, not because his words were funny, but because patience was one of the few traits everyone assumed she had in endless supply. Still, hearing it from someone who meant it sincerely felt different, lighter. "Thank you," she said quietly. He gave a small nod and returned to measuring the fence post. That was it. No long conversation, no awkward pauses, no attempt to impress her. Just a simple, genuine exchange that felt strangely refreshing. As Hannah walked inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of curiosity about another person. Not admiration, not expectation, just curiosity. Throughout the next few days, Jace continued working around the church. Sometimes Hannah caught glimpses of him from a distance, carrying boards, hammering nails, or sweeping up wood shavings. He didn't seem to mind the hard work. In fact, he looked peaceful while doing it. The rhythm of the tasks seemed to center him, as if physical work helped him clear his thoughts. People around town began talking about him, as they always did with newcomers. Some wondered where he came from. Some guessed how long he would stay. Some even tried to guess his past, although none of them actually knew. Willow Creek had a habit of filling empty spaces with stories, even if those stories weren't true. Hannah noticed that the gossip didn't bother Jace. He greeted people politely but kept his distance, not to be rude, but because he valued his space. He wasn't unfriendly, just simple, grounded, and content with silence. One afternoon, as Hannah walked past the churchyard, she saw Jace resting under the shade of a large oak tree. He had removed his hat to let the breeze cool his face. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was slow and steady, as if he was listening to the quiet around him. She watched him for a brief moment, admiring the peacefulness he carried. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt that calm. For her, silence was filled with questions and expectations. For him, silence was silence, nothing more. When he opened his eyes and saw her, he didn't jump or act embarrassed. He simply sat up, dusted his hands on his jeans, and gave her a calm smile. "Afternoon," he said. "Hi," she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You planning anything special today?" he asked, not out of nosiness but simple friendliness. "No," she said. "Just helping at home. And reading. And well, nothing very exciting." "Nothing wrong with quiet days," he said, leaning back slightly. "Sometimes they're the best ones." His words were soft but sincere, and Hannah couldn't help noticing how different his idea of quiet was from hers. For him, quiet was peaceful. For her, quiet often meant locked emotions, careful movements, and unspoken fears. She sat down on the low stone edge nearby, not too close, but close enough to talk. "Do you like traveling?" she asked. "I don't mind it," he said. "Town to town. Job to job. I go where the work takes me." "Doesn't it get lonely?" she said before she could stop herself. He considered the question, taking a moment to think. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I guess everyone feels lonely once in a while. Even people who don't travel." The way he said it made her wonder if he saw through her more than he let on. "What about you?" he asked gently. "You ever want to see more than Willow Creek?" The question hit her harder than she expected. She had dreamed of leaving, of exploring, of discovering who she could be outside the invisible walls she lived inside. But she had never told anyone these things, not even her father. I don't know," she said honestly. "Sometimes I think about it, but I don't think people here would understand." "People don't have to understand," Jace replied quietly. "What matters is whether you understand yourself." His words settled in her chest like a stone dropped into water, creating ripples she couldn't ignore. For the first time in her life, Hannah met someone who didn't expect her to be perfect. Someone who didn't treat her like a symbol or a standard. Someone who spoke to her like she was simply Hannah. And even though she barely knew him, something inside her shifted. A small part of her buried deep under years of expectations began to wake up. She didn't know it yet, but this simple, quiet friendship would soon push her closer to the truth she had been avoiding for years. Everything she thought she knew about herself was about to change. The days passed quietly in Willow Creek, but inside Hannah, something was beginning to shift slowly at first, like the gentle turning of a leaf in the wind, and then faster, as if the change had been waiting for years. She had always carried her emotions carefully, as if they were fragile glass that might break if handled wrongly. But lately, the glass felt heavier, and every expectation placed on her felt like another weight added to it. Trouble didn't start with shouting or arguments. It started with small moments that gathered inside her like rising water. It began the following Sunday morning, when the church felt more crowded than usual. Everyone was there, dressed neatly, speaking softly, preparing to listen to Pastor Clark's sermon. Hannah sat in the front row as she always did, her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight, her expression calm. But inside, she wasn't calm at all. Her mind kept drifting to the conversation she had with Jace under the oak tree. His words replayed in her thoughts like a quiet echo. People don't have to understand. What matters is whether you understand yourself. It was the first time someone had ever told her something like that, and it was the first time she believed it could be true. For years, she had tried to be everything people wanted her to be, perfect, polite, patient, but she had never asked herself what she wanted. Pastor Clark stepped to the front of the room, ready to speak. His voice was warm and steady, the same voice that had comforted many people in Willow Creek through difficult times. But today, As Hannah listened, she felt a strange tightness in her chest. He began to speak about obedience, discipline, and living by the rules of faith. The words were familiar, almost predictable. People nodded softly, agreeing as they always did. But Hannah felt something inside her beginning to strain. It wasn't that she disagreed with her father. She respected him deeply. She admired the kindness he brought into people's lives. But today, the sermon felt different. It felt like a reminder of the life she lived, a life where she rarely had space to breathe for herself. As her father's voice grew more passionate, Hannah's thoughts grew louder. She remembered how free she felt while talking to Jace, free to ask questions, free to speak honestly, free to simply be a person instead of a symbol. Suddenly, the church, usually a place of calm, felt too small. The air felt heavier, the walls closer, the expectations louder. Every word her father spoke reminded her of the quiet part of her that she had ignored for too long. She tried to stay still, but her hands trembled slightly. She swallowed hard, hoping the feeling would pass, but it didn't. Something inside her snapped, not violently, but quietly, like a thin thread that could no longer hold weight. Before she even realized what she was doing, she stood. People around her turned in surprise. Her father paused in the middle of his sentence, looking at her with confusion. "Hannah?" he asked gently. But she couldn't answer. Words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight. Her chest even tighter. She felt tears building, not because she was sad, but because she felt completely overwhelmed. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the church. She didn't run. She didn't hurry. She simply walked, each step feeling heavier than the last. The moment she stepped outside, the cool air touched her face, and she felt a surge of emotion that she had been holding back for years. She walked behind the church, to the quiet space where the trees offered shade and silence. She sank down onto the steps, burying her face in her hands. The tears came softly at first, then faster. They weren't tears of anger or shame, they were tears of release. For the first time in her life, she had stepped out of the role people expected her to play. It was frightening, but it also felt strangely freeing. She didn't know how long she cried. Maybe minutes, maybe longer. But as she sat there, trying to calm her breathing, she heard footsteps approaching, slow, careful footsteps, not rushing or demanding. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Jace. He stood a few feet away, not too close, giving her space. He held his hat in his hands, out of respect, his expression soft and patient. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Hannah tried to speak, but all she managed was a shaky breath. It wasn't embarrassment she felt, just exhaustion, deep and overwhelming. Jace didn't move closer. He didn't try to touch her or crowd her. He simply sat down on the step, a short distance from her, placing his hat beside him. "Take your time," he said. His presence felt like shade on a hot day, gentle, steady, and comforting without being overwhelming. After a few slow breaths, Hannah wiped her eyes, though the tears kept coming in small waves. "I don't know what happened," she whispered. "I've never walked out before." "Center." "You don't have to explain," Jace replied. "Sometimes things build up. Happens to everyone. But not to me," she said quietly. "At least, not where anyone can see." Jace tilted his head slightly, studying her expression without judgment. "Maybe you've been carrying too much for too long." Those words felt like someone finally turning a key in a locked door inside her. She drew in a shaky breath. "I'm tired," she admitted softly. "Not tired from work or school. Just tired of being what everyone expects." "That's a heavy kind of tired," Jace replied. "Hardest kind to shake." Hannah looked at him, her eyes red and swollen. "Have you ever felt like that?" He nodded slowly. "Plenty of times. Before I learned that I didn't have to live for anyone else's approval." "When?" Hannah blinked. You make it sound easy. He shook his head. It wasn't. But it got easier when I stopped pretending. She stared down at her hands, the sunlight warming her fingers. I don't know how to stop pretending. I don't even know who I am without all this. You don't have to know, he said. Not yet. Silence settled between them. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that feels safe. Like a conversation that continues without words. Then Hannah said something she had never said out loud before. I feel like I've been living someone else's life. Jace didn't seem surprised. He simply nodded. A lot of people do. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, then slowly released it. It felt like the first real breath she had taken in years. Her voice trembled when she finally said the words that had been trapped inside her for too long. I think I'm a sinner. Not because I'm doing anything wrong, but because I don't feel like the person everyone thinks I am. Jace's expression softened even more. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be yourself, he said calmly. That's not sin. That's human. Hannah closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. For the first time, she didn't feel guilty for feeling different. She didn't feel ashamed for being confused. She felt understood, and that understanding felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. When she opened her eyes again, Jace had placed his hat gently on the step beside them. He sat quietly, waiting, not expecting an answer, not pushing her, just being there. For someone who had spent her whole life being watched, being expected to behave, being judged quietly by everyone around her. This simple moment of genuine presence meant more than anything. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know how her father would react, or what the town would say, or what changes would come. But in that quiet moment behind the church, sitting beside someone who saw her as a person, not a symbol, Hannah felt the first spark of courage she had ever known. Everything was beginning to change. And, for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. Days after Hannah walked out of the church, the atmosphere in Willow Creek changed in quiet but noticeable ways. People didn't talk loudly about what happened, at least not at first. But their glances became longer, their whispers softer, and their curiosity sharper. Small towns didn't need storms to create waves. Even a quiet ripple could travel far. But Hannah wasn't thinking about the town or its whispers. She was thinking about herself. For the first time in her life, she felt two worlds pulling at her. One was the world she had always lived in, orderly, polite, carefully shaped. The second was a world she had only recently discovered, messy, confusing, but somehow more honest. She didn't fully belong in either place yet, and the space between them felt both frightening and freeing. During the days following the incident, she avoided long conversations with her father. He didn't force her to talk but gave her gentle looks that showed he was worried. Pastor Clark wasn't angry, he was confused. He had never seen his daughter walk away from anything, especially not from a sermon, but he sensed that something inside her had been building for a long time. Something deeper than simple frustration. He wanted to ask her questions, but every time he tried, her silence told him she wasn't ready, so he waited. Sometimes waiting was the kindest thing a person could do. Meanwhile, Hannah found herself spending more time outside the house. She walked to the far edge of the property where the field stretched wide and quiet. She sat beneath the tall oak tree where she used to read as a child. She spent afternoons listening to the wind and the distant sounds of horses from nearby ranches. It felt peaceful, even though her heart was still tangled with emotions she didn't fully understand. But the person who stayed in her mind the most was Jace. Not because he had said anything extraordinary, but because he had spoken with honesty, not judgment. He had listened, with patience, not pressure. Being around him felt like standing in clear air after being inside a crowded room for too long. One afternoon, she saw him again near the church, working on the last section of the fence. She stopped a few steps away, unsure if she should interrupt. But he noticed her and set down the board he was holding. "You doing better today?" he asked gently. She nodded. A little. I think I'm beginning to understand myself more. Jace dusted off his hands and leaned against the fence. That takes time, he said. And courage. I didn't feel very brave, she replied. I still don't. Courage doesn't feel big, he told her. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's messy. But it's still courage. She smiled faintly at that. It was a comforting thought. One she had never heard before. They stood in silence for a moment. But it wasn't uncomfortable. The breeze carried the soft scent of cedar from the church steps, and the late sun cast warm light across the ground. Then Hannah spoke again, her voice soft but steady. Jace, that day behind the church, I said something I've never said to anyone. I know, he replied, and I'm glad you trusted me with it. I wasn't trying to shock anyone, she said quietly. I didn't mean the words the way they sounded. He nodded. I understand. I meant, she continued, choosing each word carefully, that I feel guilty for wanting to be myself. People think I'm perfect, but I'm not. And I don't want to pretend anymore. Jace looked at her with calm, steady eyes. There's nothing wrong with wanting to live your truth. That doesn't make you bad. It makes you human. Hannah exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding for years. When I said, I'm a sinner. And I like it. I didn't mean doing anything wrong. I meant that I finally feel alive when I stop trying to be perfect. Jace adjusted his hat and set it back down again. Then, he said something she would remember for a long time. Wanting to live honestly isn't wrong. Hiding who you are, that's what hurts people, including yourself. His words settled inside her like warm sunlight spreading through cold shadows. For a moment, she simply looked at him. Jace wasn't a preacher, or a teacher, or someone trying to shape her thoughts. He was just a man who spoke plainly. Someone who had lived enough life to understand what it meant to carry the weight of expectations and the weight of breaking free from them. What if people judge me? She asked softly. They might, he said, not sugarcoating the truth. But their judgment can't tell you who you are. Only you can do that. And my father, she whispered. Jace took a slow breath. He loves you. He might struggle with the change, but love doesn't vanish. It just needs time to understand. Axe. Hannah lowered her gaze. Sometimes I feel like I'm disappointing him. Have you talked to him? Jace asked gently. No, she admitted. I'm afraid he won't understand. Jace nodded. Then give him space. And give yourself space too. Not everything needs to be solved at once. His calm reassurance eased something inside her. She realized she didn't need to solve her entire life in a single day. She just needed to keep taking small steps toward honesty. As the sun dipped lower, casting long orange shadows across the churchyard, Jace finished tightening the last nail in the fence. He stood, stepped back, and slipped off his hat in a simple gesture of respect. Something he often did at the end of a job or important moment. Hannah watched him quietly, understanding the meaning behind the gesture. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't symbolic. In the noisy, flashy way stories often describe. It was simply him being himself, genuine, polite, steady. Something warm flickered in her chest. Not in a loud way. In a quiet, reassuring way. He turned to her. You're stronger than you think, he said softly. Maybe, she replied. Or maybe I'm just tired. Being tired means you've been carrying a lot, he said. And that takes strength. The words touched her deeply. Nobody had ever told her strength looked like this: confusion, exhaustion, honesty. But Jace saw it clearly. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile fully. You always seem to know the right thing to say, she told him. He chuckled lightly. Not really. I just speak what feels true. They walked side by side toward the front of the church. The air was getting cooler, and a soft hush settled over the quiet street. Before they reached the steps, Hannah paused. "Jace? Yeah?" She took a slow breath. "Thank you. For listening. For understanding. For not making me feel wrong." He met her gaze with a soft, steady smile. "You don't owe me thanks. You just needed someone to hear you. I was there. That's all." But she shook her head. "It means more than you know." Jace didn't argue. He simply nodded. As she turned to head home, she felt lighter, not completely, but enough to breathe more freely. Enough to walk without feeling like the entire town's weight was pressing on her shoulders. Behind her, Jace placed his hat back on his head, watching her leave with quiet respect. No expectations, no judgments, just simple understanding. And that simple understanding changed everything. That day, Hannah realized something important. Freedom didn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it arrived quietly. In honest conversations. In the courage to speak words she had held inside for too long. In the presence of someone who saw her for who she truly was. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't broken. She was simply human, finally learning who she could become. And the next steps of her life would no longer be taken in silence. Hannah woke up the next morning with a strange mixture of fear and calm inside her. The world outside her window was the same as always, the dust floating in the sunlight, the trees moving gently in the wind, the sound of her father's old truck starting as he prepared to leave for a church meeting. But inside her, everything had changed. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had stepped out of a cage, even though she didn't fully know where she was going next. The freedom was both comforting and frightening, like standing at the edge of a cliff with a beautiful view and also a long drop. The night before kept repeating itself in her mind. She remembered how she had spoken honestly for the first time, how the words had come out of her without shaking, and how Jace had listened to every one of them without judgment. That memory gave her strength. If she could speak her truth once, she could do it again. She could do it 100 times, even if people disagreed, even if they whispered, even if it caused trouble. Truth had a strange way of making a person feel alive. When she stepped out of her room, she could feel her father's quiet disappointment filling the house like smoke. He was sitting at the dining table with his Bible open, but he wasn't reading it. He was just staring at the pages, as if they held questions he couldn't answer. Hannah stood there for a moment, unsure whether she should speak or stay silent. Their relationship had never been simple, but now it felt even more complicated. She wanted to explain everything to him, but she also knew he wouldn't understand it yet. Not today. Her father finally lifted his eyes, and she saw that he looked tired. Not angry, not harsh, just tired. Maybe from years of carrying expectations on his shoulders, 2 expectations from the church, the town, and himself. She wondered, for the first time ever, if he also felt trapped sometimes. She wanted to ask him, but the moment wasn't right. "You left in the middle of the service yesterday," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "People noticed." "I know." He waited for her to explain more, but she didn't. Not because she didn't want to, but because she needed more time to find the right words. Silence grew between them, but not the angry kind. It was more like a space that would someday be filled with understanding, just not today. She gave him a small, gentle nod, and he nodded back, almost as if he understood that she was on a path he couldn't control. Later that day, she walked into town. Every step felt heavier than usual, not because she was scared, but because she knew everything around her was about to change. She knew people would talk. Small towns always talked. They talked about who wore what, who said what, and especially about the preacher's daughter, who suddenly decided to live differently. As she walked past the bakery, she heard 2 older women whispering. They didn't say her name, but she didn't need to hear it to know the whispers were about her. She kept walking. her chin a little higher than usual. She wasn't rude. She wasn't angry. She was simply done living for them. That strength carried her all the way to the ranch, where Jace worked. She found him fixing a fence near the edge of the pasture. He looked up when he saw her, and his face softened with that warm, steady calm she had come to rely on. He didn't rush over, didn't panic, didn't question. He simply gave her the space to speak when she was ready. "I think I caused a storm," she said with a small smile. "You didn't cause it," he replied. "It was already there. You just stopped pretending it wasn't." His words felt like a deep breath after years of holding in air. She sat on a nearby fallen log and watched him work for a moment. The simple movements, the natural rhythm, the patience in everything he did, all of it reminded her that life didn't have to feel like a constant performance. There were people in the world who lived honestly, without fear of judgment. People like Jace. And she wanted to be one of them. They talked about her father, the church, the town's reaction, and the future. But more importantly, they talked about her, who she wanted to be, what she wanted to do, and how she felt now that she had finally spoken her truth. For the first time ever, she allowed herself to dream without limitations. "I don't know exactly what I want to do next," she admitted. "I just know I can't go back to pretending." "That's enough for now," Jace said. "You don't need all the answers today." His words made her smile, because they were true. She had spent her entire life believing she needed every step planned, every move approved, every decision blessed by the town. But now she realized that nothing was wrong with taking life one decision at a time. Freedom didn't have to look dramatic. Sometimes, it was as simple as choosing honesty over fear. Days turned into weeks, and the town slowly adjusted to the new version of her. Some people disapproved, some stayed curious, and some quietly respected her bravery even if they didn't say it out loud. Her father struggled the most. Not because he didn't love her, but because he didn't know how to let go of the tight expectations he believed kept his family safe. But even he began to soften. He noticed how calm she seemed now, how the tension in her shoulders had faded, how her laughter came more naturally. He didn't fully understand her journey, but he couldn't deny the peace she carried. One evening, she found him sitting on the porch, staring at the sunset. She sat beside him, and this time, he didn't look away. He cleared his throat before speaking. "You're different," he said quietly. "I'm still your daughter," she replied. "I know," he whispered. "I'm just trying to understand everything." "You don't have to understand it all today," she said, repeating the same gentle message Jace had once given her. They sat there together in peaceful silence. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the months passed, Hannah built a life that reflected who she truly was. She started volunteering in town, helping at the local youth center, using her own struggles to guide young people who felt trapped by expectations. She discovered that she had a natural gift for connecting with others, especially those who didn't feel comfortable sharing their feelings with parents or teachers. Instead of being the perfect example people expected, she became something much more powerful. A real, honest, approachable human being. Her relationship with Jace grew slowly, built on trust instead of drama. They didn't rush anything. They didn't force anything. They simply supported each other, step by step, day by day, growing into a friendship that carried quiet strength. Some people assumed the worst, but Hannah didn't care. What mattered was that he believed in her, and she believed in herself. One afternoon, while standing near the church fence that Jace had repaired months earlier, she realized how far she had come. She remembered standing there crying, feeling like her entire world was falling apart. Now, she stood there calm, confident, and hopeful. She was no longer the girl afraid of disappointing everyone. She was a woman who had learned that true peace comes from honesty, not perfection. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a sinner. She felt like a human being imperfect, learning, growing, and free. and that was more than enough.